The topic that we're going to be diving into today, it's a little bit of a wordy title, but it's a complicated topic. We're going to be talking about some of the things that you need to consider when you're thinking about your software engineering insights strategy. And I'll use the acronym SEI when I'm referencing software engineering insights throughout the rest of the presentation. But the strategy aspect of this is something that's really important, and specifically for larger organizations of the enterprise size and scale. So this is a topic that has come up over and over again as I work with customers with what we do at CodeClimate. So we thought it would be a good idea to just try to capture some of the basic building blocks that we think of and that we encourage others to think of as we help folks build a strategy that's going to work for them. So a little bit about me first. My background is in digital transformation. I came from the Pivotal VMware tree of folks that were working with the large scale enterprise organizations, the Fortune 500 organizations, in large government agencies on the type of big change initiatives and experimentation and adopting new ways of working. That naturally led me into this space where we wanted to be able to quantify some of the things we were doing, which is how I ended up at CodeClimate. So I have the opportunity to merge those two interests together in one role here, which has been a lot of fun. But I think one of the key things that is important here is that making big shifts requires big beliefs, and there's a big burden to get people to buy into some of the big changes that organizations are wanting to make, or the leaders are wanting to drive. And engineering insights has a role to play in making that a little bit easier. And we are all chasing in the world of software, specifically, if you consider yourself to be a modern software leader, we're chasing these three things. We want to have a culture of continuous improvement. We want to have the ability to go from idea to impact quickly, frequently, and with confidence. And then we want to have a software organization that is actually delivering meaningful value. These things we could talk a lot about them philosophically, but at the end of the day, this is what most modern leaders are trying to do with the software organization that they have. And as AI and other technological advances are coming to market here, this is becoming even more important to be thinking about. And in order to do this, though, from where most organizations are starting from, that those three attributes, they don't happen by accident. I believe you need data and you need action, but more importantly, you need a culture shift. And to make those three components come together, you've got to have a cohesive strategy. And that piece is something that I've observed time and time again. I've worked with hundreds of large organizations over my career, both with CodeClimate and in prior lives. And I've been able to see a lot of what works and what doesn't. Time and time again, I keep coming back to the same type of universal truths that every time I've seen a failed attempt at a big shift or an adoption of a new approach or an adoption of a new technology, there's a common denominator, which is that there was a lack of a cohesive strategy. There's a lot of other possible failure points, but that one's pretty universal in all of the failures that I personally witnessed. So that's part of the reason why we're talking about it and why I think it is important to talk about. Because I do think without the cohesive, comprehensive strategy driving your initiative, you're going to not get value out of what you're trying to do and end up with a little bit of frustration across the entire organization. And nobody's looking for that. Certainly not me. The components of a strong SDI strategy, we've been able to whittle this down over the past several months as we've tried to build a bit of a system around what we've seen. And the starting point is purpose. Why are you doing this in the first place? If you're looking to adopt developer productivity metrics or software engineering insights, why? If you ask 5 different leaders in your organization, are you going to get 5 people saying the same thing, or are you going to get 5 different answers? A lot of organizations, when they begin this journey, they get too far down the road before they realize that there were there was not alignment on what the big picture was for all of this in the first place. And one of the exercises that I think is helpful as a tool to help think through the purpose of this initiative. Obviously, you've got to have the right people involved in the conversation, but I like to think about this in terms of 5 whys. So I've talked to a lot of people who say, we need engineering metrics. When I ask them why, that the first why in a lot of scenarios, they're not able to answer. Well, it's because somebody told me I need to go have engineering metrics. That's not a great answer. It might be the real answer, but then you got to figure out why that person asked for it. So this is just an example of something that I encountered fairly recently, but asking why until you get to the core of what the purpose is, I think, a really important thing to be able to do. So in this case, the driving factor is that we're missing deliverables and we don't know why. So bringing some visibility into that is important. But the reason why starting with the purpose here is if we know that the core thing we're trying to answer is our missing deliverables and the uncertainty around it, we can eliminate a whole host of potentially distracting paths to go down with the initial implementation of our strategy. We can just focus on making sure that we're addressing the thing that is most important for us to handle. So a lot of the companies that I've talked to that have previously adopted an SEI technology don't have a good answer for the purpose. So they're looking at metrics like PR cycle times or review counts without much meaning behind why any of those things are important. They're just trying to make them improve. Right? Doing it within context of a greater purpose is going to be much more impactful and lead to a lot smarter decision making as you think about the rest of your process and approach. The second component of a strong SEI strategy might sound straightforward, but is a little bit more complicated once you peel back the top layer. That's people. So you've got to consider, who do you expect to be the users of the SEI tooling or approach? Are there people that are hands-on keyboard doing something with the information? Who's going to be receiving the information? You've got executives. I think it's a very common use case for a lot of SEI platforms is being able to roll up insights to leadership. So they're definitely a stakeholder in this. What a lot of folks don't consider is that your stakeholders that are looking for some of this information might also be sitting in a line of business somewhere. They might be sitting in finance. Getting an idea of who the broader stakeholder and consumer group is going to be really important so that you understand what capabilities are needed out of the approach you're doing. I think a couple other things to consider here around the people aspect of it is assume your organization changes, because it does. Everybody knows quarterly reorg is a bit of a joke in the enterprise world, but it happens frequently everywhere. So as you reorg in the organization and your structure, who is maintaining the SEI platform that you purchased to make sure that it is still telling the truth relative to your new reality? Who's focused on doing that? It might not be the same people that purchased the tool. It's probably not the people that are using it in a hands-on capacity, but it can easily get to the point where people stop using a platform because the data is not current and relevant. The data is not current and relevant because they didn't evolve the platform as the organization evolved. They didn't evolve the platform because they didn't have anybody who was identified as being on the hook for evolving the platform. So having a good idea of the broader people involved in your initiative extends far beyond just who you expect to use the tooling itself. The third category here is process. And this may sound, again, straightforward, but in my experience, what I'm seeing is that it really isn't. A lot of organizations, when they adopt some sort of tooling around engineering metrics, the level of thought stops at, we've made data available. Okay, now the data is available. Now what happens? What is it that you're expecting people to do with that information? Do they have air cover to actually take those actions? How are we tracking those actions and seeing if it's actually making improvements in things? I think coming to the table with an understanding of, now that we have access to this information, what do we expect people to do and who do we expect to be doing those things, is often overlooked and assumed in a lot of different contexts, but that assumption rarely gets alignment with all of the people involved, and it doesn't often align to what the greater purpose is. And thinking about the process, one thing that I recommend to all organizations as they do get access to engineering insights is to have an experimentation mindset. As I mentioned, my background came from like the agile transformation world, did a lot of like lean hypothesis and experiment type thinking. It really applies here. So you want to start with, what is it that you're observing as an area for opportunity or an area for improvement? What's something that you believe you could test that might make a difference on that problem? And then how are you going to know if you are right or not? That's where you now have access to the engineering insights to be able to help you determine if the experiments are leading you in the direction that you're looking to go. What I do not recommend doing is starting with a metric and then figuring out, what can I do to change that metric? I think this pollutes the value of the data that's coming, and it pollutes the purpose of having access to this information. It's very common that we get laser focused on improving a number at the expense of the broader system. So rather than thinking about, how might I improve this particular number, you want to start with the problem that has been observed. Very rarely is somebody looking at the state of your development organization and saying, your review cycles are too low, get those higher, or your review cycles are too high, get those lower. That's not the type of problem that we want to start with. That might be a way that you're going to measure an improvement, but the problem might be that too much poor quality code's getting sent down the rest of the pipeline. Like, we need to do something about that. One potential approach might be adjusting your review process, but looking at the review numbers just for the sake of those numbers isn't going to get you what you're looking to do. In the absence of a cleanly explained program around how you expect people to use the data, it does tend to devolve to the level of, I see a number on a dashboard and my boss wants me to make it go higher or lower. We think part of a cohesive strategy needs to be level setting with everybody, how to use the information. And the experimental mindset and starting with an observable problem or a starting hypothesis, I think, is a really key way of doing that. So process is how I categorize people who have information to the data. What are you going to have them do with it? On the other end of the spectrum is what I refer to as program. And program is something that is often the last thing people think about, if they think about it at all. And that's, how do you plan on rolling out access to the new capabilities that you've provided to your organization? You've given access to this, a new superpower of being able to look at these engineering insights. I've never seen that work as a sustainable path towards getting people success. If you're going to think about the different business units you have, the different roles you have, so you might have different product portfolios, you may have completely different ways of working. Understanding all of those things and how to roll out access to this type of platform or program to those customers, it's going to be different in every place. And if you try to take a one size fits all approach, or just flip it on like you would a tool like Slack or something like that, you're not going to get the type of meaningful utilization out of the insights. And I do think it's really important to separate somebody logging into the tool and seeing numbers is very different from somebody driving meaningful change because of the numbers. We care way more about the second thing. we don't care at all if people are logging into a tool. We want to know that people are using the insights to make changes. So how is your program? How is your rollout? How is your approach setting the organization up so people can do that? I think in the world of large scale change initiatives, I'm a firm believer that you want to complete the full value loop in a small pocket of the organization before you try to scale it out. And when I talk about value loop, really what I'm meaning is in the context of software engineering insights, how can you get a team or a pod or a portfolio to see insights from your new tooling, make a change, have a quantitative improvement, and capture that as an internally shareable experience report? Going through those steps and having somebody being able to raise their hand and say, this was extremely helpful to us. Look what we did. That to me is how I would define like the value loop for adopting an SCI platform or a program. So when you're designing your rollout program, I would certainly recommend designing it for that experience. How can we get a small group of people to go through that full value loop so that we've got success stories that can help onboard people to go through their own value loops and then spread it throughout the organization? Way more valuable than looking at it and saying, last quarter, 42% of our people logged in. Anybody make anything better? Anybody drive any improvement? You need to be able to optimize for that. This is often used as a form of, I think, like the stages of grief, but it's also played into any type of enterprise change initiative I've ever personally been a part of. Is you're going to have this entire journey that folks are going to go through. And the more that you can account for that and expect that as you're building your strategy, the more successful or the increased odds of success would be in your favor. It doesn't benefit anybody to pretend that there won't be denial. There's going to be people that are going to look at any sort of initiative and say, I don't want it. It's not helpful. It's extremely detrimental. Get it away from me. You need to plan for that as you're thinking about adopting your SCI strategy. This model, again, seen it every time I've wanted to do any sort of large scale change. Adoption of engineering insights is no different. The final piece, the last part of your SCI strategy that should be considered, unfortunately, is where a lot of organizations start. And that is in the platform itself. CodeClimate, we make an engineering insights platform. There are a lot of other companies that do also, but they're all pretty good. There's a lot of really great products out on the market. Everybody has kind of like their own specialty and flavor. And because of that, I think it is really important to answer the other 4 categories of your strategy before you start thinking about what your platform approach should be. One of the organizations that I spoke with recently, very large enterprise in the telecom space, they evaluated every vendor on the market and decided that none of them were able to align to their purpose and deliver against the people, program, and process the way that they expected. So they didn't buy any of them. They opted to build their own, which might be the right option, but that's not a decision that I think you can make intelligently unless you've addressed the other components of the strategic piece. A few years ago, adopting SCI platforms just felt like the thing to do. There were a lot of companies who were like, hey, I need to get one. Let me negotiate terms. Let's get it installed and rolled out. And then money was a little bit cheaper. We were in a zero interest time period there where investment was free flowing for engineering organizations. But now we're looking at a situation where everything's being evaluated and scrutinized. And are we getting value out of the things we are investing in as a business? And a lot of the organizations looked at their SCI platform and said, I don't know that we're getting value out of this at all. We've had it because we had it, but I can't explain what changes we've made at our business because of it. I can't explain why our teams are better now than they were before. That's why I really think talking about platform before you've addressed your own understanding of the first four components here, it's premature. I would love to be in a position where someone comes and talks to me at Code Climate and says, hey, we're looking to buy your platform. Here's our SCI strategy. If someone were to be able to come to me with that, I would happily tell them, we're not a good fit for your strategy. Your strategy makes perfect sense for you. We're not in a position to be able to deliver against that. We might be just the opposite for a different organization with a different strategy. But having answers to that is going to be way more helpful for you all to know, who should I buy, or maybe should I build, or do I need one of these things at all? So think about platform. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it is where most people start. There's a lot of stuff out on the market. It's easy to find. It's easier to go through a vendor evaluation for a platform than it is to build the rest of the strategy. So I understand why a lot of folks start there first, but definitely recommend focusing on those other aspects. So again, we're not going to be able to cover in 30 minutes here how to build your strategy, but these give you the building blocks of things that you need to be thinking about if you're going to have a really effective rollout of an engineering insights and like a data-driven culture as part of your organization. So we did get a couple questions from folks who registered ahead of time. So I will work through those now. So the first that came in was one that I get a lot. About a year ago, actually, I gave a talk at the Gartner Apps Summit about this very topic, and connecting software engineering metrics to business impact is a common problem. And I think part of it is the framing of that. I think we want to flip it the other way around and be able to think about, what is the business impact that we're trying to do, and which of these software engineering metrics are going to be most likely to have an impact on the business objectives. I think it's very easy to start from the bottom and say, hey, we've got access to a whole bunch of different developer metrics. Which of these are important? You're not going to get a ton of mileage there. I really do think you need to start with the inverse. What's the business trying to achieve? And then based off of that, what of the available engineering metrics to us are the ones that are going to be more likely to influence the business impact that we're chasing? I think a good example of this is, say we've got a core functionality that needs to be released for Valentine's Day, in advance of Valentine's Day. The business has a big chunk of their quarterly earnings are tied to having a successful Valentine's Day time period. So as an engineering organization, we've got like a strict deadline in order to do there. So when we're looking at our engineering insights, we can look at what are the things that are going to help us make sure that we can get through the scoped backlog in the appropriate amount of time with the appropriate amount of quality. You might want to look at how many non-related tasks and stories are getting pulled into our sprints from elsewhere. That's a metric that we can take action upon. But if you're not focused on a super strict deadline with a thick capability, that metric may not be as important to you. But if you understand the appropriate business impact that you're chasing, then you can make a decision on what the handful of engineering insights need to be to focus on. So question number 2 here is around building versus buying a metrics product. Go back to the entire thing that I just talked about. You really need to be thinking about, what is the broader strategy? I mentioned my friend who worked at the telecom organization and why they opted to go for building their own platform. And one of the key reasons was they encourage their 1,000+ number of application teams to operate autonomously. They do not have a set standard way of working. They do not have set standard tooling. That is core to their culture. They want each team to feel like they've got the autonomy to do what's best for them. So a lot of the tools that are built by vendors that are out on the market believe or are structured around like a way of working that just right off the bat didn't fit for them and their specific use case. So understanding the other components of your strategy and like the unique nature and traits of your specific organization are things that I would recommend to help with that building versus buying bet. And as an aside, Like, we are more than happy to have strategy conversations with customers or with prospects. That the correct answer to these types of workshops that we run is not go with Code Climate. The correct answer is really helping folks understand this is what your strategy looks like and what you might want to be looking for or chasing. So if that's something that's interesting to you, reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation to help build out what that strategy might look like. The answer for you might be building, it might be buying, or it might be doing nothing. Another question that I get commonly, if we're just starting out, which metric should we be focused on? I'm going to go back to my answer to question number one. It really depends on what it is you're trying to do. And I'll go back even further to the first component of the strategy we talked about, which is what's the purpose of looking at any of this in the first place? I know it might be easier to say, hey, you should look at your PR cycle time. Maybe that's what it should be, but we really want to be able to anchor that in something that is greater, something that is higher level and more meaningful to the organization itself, and not just a very technical metric. Everybody's least favorite answer, but my answer to question number three is it depends. And it does depend based off of the other factors that we've talked about throughout this presentation. That is the last of the questions that I had prepared from previous registrants. Look, I love chatting with folks, so reach out to me via email, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions about this presentation or about the world of software engineering insights or strategy, period, feel free to reach out. We love chatting and like to geek out on this type of stuff with people. Appreciate all of you who are able to join today. We're going to be doing more of these webinars on a recurring basis, so I look forward to seeing you at some of them down the road.